channel, The Fancy Hat Lady Reads. I am wearing one of my fancy booktube hats. Yes, I do have new glasses frames. You may compliment me on them if you wish. And since I am finally free of Hugo Award reading for the year, I survived, I figured it's time to talk about some of this year's Hugo nominees. Specifically, I want to talk about the novella category because I read all of the novellas this year. I initially was sort of planning a video specifically about the 3 that are fairy tale-ish because that's very much in my wheelhouse and I wanted to sort of compare and contrast them, but then having read all the books, I think I would rather just talk about all of them. But I think I will start with the 3 that are fairy tale-ish because they were the books I most expected to like, and it did not turn out that way for all of them. So for the record, the best novella shortlist this year is Automatic Noodle by Annalee Newitz, Cinder House by Freya. Where is my copy of Cinder House? Hold on. Where is it? Cinder House did not make it into the thumbnail, but here it is. Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite, The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar, The Summer War by Naomi Novik, and What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. I'm going to start by talking about The River Has Roots for a couple reasons. First, this was the only book on this list that I read last year, so I had already read this a while ago by the time I was reading all the others, and I did nominate it. This is a retelling of a folk ballad. It's the Trois Sisters, or the Two Sisters, or their variants by any number of other names. It's the one with the dead sister who gets turned into a harp. And it turns it into a much more positive story about sisterhood and also includes a little bit of a romance for one of the sisters. This is extremely lyrically beautifully written. It has several illustrations, these fairly simple style illustrations that I think add a vibe to it. The sort of leafy and grassy framing on a bunch of the pages is not part of the illustration. That's part of the book design. The premise of this is that this family lives in a town near a river that runs out of fairy, and their family grow and tend to these magical willow trees along the banks of the river that are coveted for their wood. And right away it establishes this idea that magic is grammar, which is very interesting and very whimsical. This ticked so many of my boxes for what I look for in whimsical fairy tale writing, but it left me like just a little empty and underwhelmed by the end, and I had a really hard time pinpointing why. And I say this having given it a high 4-star rating, but having gone into it with the expectation that it was a likely 5-star read. And I think part of it is that I was unaware going in that the back chunk of the book is an unrelated short story that's provided as like a tease for Amal El-Mohtar's story collection that came out this year, so I was not expecting the end to come when it did, and so I was expecting more, and then it ended and there was this other story. I also have the suspicion that this might not have hit for me emotionally the way it has for some people, just because I'm an only child and I don't personally relate to sibling stories. But I still really liked this and highly recommend it, and I do expect that it is going to win. Not only because I think it's the best book on this list, and I do, but also because there seems to be a sort of consensus around the quality of this book that I haven't seen for any of the other books on this list. The second of the fairy tale-ish books that I read from this list is Cinder House by Freya, which is very different from The River Has Roots. This is a ghost retelling of Cinderella in which Cinderella is dead. She and her father were both murdered by her stepmother for the house and the fortune, and she has become a ghost who is tethered to this house. She is an extension of the house. She can't leave it, although she does eventually find ways to work around that, and she can interact with the house physically in ways that she can't interact physically with the rest of the world, and so that's how her stepfamily manages to turn her into the servant of the house, because she can tidy and clean and all these things specifically within the confines of the house. So first of all, I like Freya Marske's writing style. It isn't as flowery as Amal El-Mohtar's, but I still find her to be like a very stylish writer. Her descriptions and her characters always feel very vivid to me. This is less of a romance than her other books, although it does have some romance in it. Ella is bisexual and her attraction to both men and women is explored. It is not spooky. I kind of expected this to be spooky gothic Cinderella, and it's not. Although now that I have spoken it into existence, I would enjoy a spooky gothic Cinderella retelling. Please tell me if it exists. That said, I found this slow to get into. Right off the start, you're told the protagonist is dead, and gosh, that was a bummer start to the book. I was really sad about that. And like permanently dead in a way that nothing's really going to be able to fix. So I was sitting there for what felt like a really long time, waiting to figure out how she was gonna get around being dead. But by the time we figure out like how she's going to get to the ball, I felt like I could trust the story again. And this isn't the sort of story where it's going to have like a perfect happy ending because she is dead and nothing can fix that. But it is ultimately all about sort of working within a set of constraints to find happiness. Ella spends all of this book basically testing the constraints of her ghosthood and her haunting, and ultimately she does end the book in a really good place for a ghost. I did also give this book 4 stars, but it was a lower 4 stars than The River Has Roots. And then the third book that I thought was going to be fairy tale-ish was The Summer War by Naomi Novik. And I'm actually gonna put my foot down a bit here and say that this is not a fairy tale book. This is a fae book. And that it doesn't actually, to me, have any particularly strong fairy tale narrative influences. I bought this after the Hugo list was announced because it wasn't in the Hugo voter packet. It is the only book on this list that's not from Tor.com, so I was rooting for it. Or a Tor publishing group imprint, because what Stalks the Deep is Nightfire, but Nightfire is also a Tor publishing group imprint. I think this category needs more publisher diversity to be interesting. And unfortunately, I only gave this 3 stars because I think this book needed to be a novel. I think it doesn't work as a novella, and it felt rushed and structurally frustrating this way. So I kind of assumed this was going to be fairy tale-ish because it seems like a return to the sort of storytelling that Naomi Novik was doing with Uprooted and Spinning Silver, both of which I think had pretty obvious fairy tale influences, especially Spinning Silver, which was a Rumpelstiltskin pastiche. But Spinning Silver was also like a political fae fantasy, except I think it was also the sort of thing where they're not called fae, they're called something else. This is like that too. And this is also the political sort of fae fantasy, but without any, to me, really recognizable fairy tale elements. In this book, we follow Celia, the youngest of 3 children of basically like a general who rose to political power and became a powerful nobleman through cunning. And this is a secondary world in a fantasy kingdom that for many years was at war with the Summerlings. That is the Summer War of the title, and the Summer Court is one of the 2 like immortal fae courts of this world. Their unseelie opposite also like has a name and is mentioned, but is not relevant to the plot. Anyways, the Summer War is supposed to have been over for Celia's whole life, but when she is 12 years old, she unexpectedly comes into her powers as a sorceress, and this sort of kickstarts a chain of events that reveals deeper, darker secrets of the Summer War and the political situation between the mortal kingdom and the Summer Court. That is how I would describe this book. That is not at all how the blurb on the back describes this book, so this was not what I was expecting it to be. The way the back of the book describes it is that this is about a girl who, when she was 12, she accidentally cursed her brother to a life without love, and now that she is grown, she is going to set out to try to undo the curse. This is technically true. It, however, led me to expect some things from this book that were not going to happen. It made me think Celia was going to be an adult during most of this book. The oldest she gets here is 16. Most of the book happens when she is 16, and this is a teenager. Second, she never actually goes on that quest because the politics starts happening. This turns into like a forced marriage for political purposes plotline that I was not expecting and did not appreciate. Thankfully, it was not a romance. I think if it had turned romantic, I would have chucked the book across the room in despair. Now, when I say I think this book should have been a novel, what I mean is that this book is really about all three of these siblings. And all three of them are equally important to the plot, and I think all three of them should have been POV characters. Celia alone here is just not a strong enough center for this story. Also, part of what felt so odd to me about the pacing of this is because there's so much political backstory, a huge portion of like the first half of the book is just info dump on the political backstory. And that was a fine amount of info dump if it was a larger book, but it was too big a percentage of a novella. And then a significant amount of the second half of the book is Celia stuck in a tower, watching everything happen and having just like a lot of feelings about politics and difficult choices and both of her brothers, while everything happens below her. And then some like actual plot criticism I have. One, the resolution to the plot line with that curse on the brother. There is like a sort of twist ending to it where the curse is broken in a way that wasn't expected. And it made me stop and like actually go back and read the scene where she cursed her brother and like look at the wording of that curse, and I don't think it adds up to what happened in the end that broke the curse. And then I didn't appreciate how quickly the end of the book seems to absolve the father of all wrongdoing. Like, he was a bad parent, he was neglectful, he drove his son away with homophobia, and like none of this gets addressed. He just sort of swoops in and does a good guy thing at the end and woohoo. It doesn't feel earned. Really very little about the ending of this book feels earned. I didn't mean to sit down here and feel like I was bashing this book this much. Like, mostly I had a good time reading it. It was pleasant. And then afterwards I sat with it and had more and more nitpicks. Anyways, I gave this 3 stars, so it slots firmly behind the other 2. And then if I take the other 3 novellas just in the order that I read them first, Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite. This is a book I really enjoyed when I read it. It was, I think, the first thing I picked up for the Hugos after the shortlist was announced. Because it was one of the books I already owned in hardcover. I didn't have to wait for the voter packet. This is a cozy-ish sci-fi murder mystery that is meant to be the start of a series. And I enjoyed this a lot at the time I read it. And then since I read it and liked it, I have seen a lot more reviews from other people who read it because it was Hugo nominated, people whose opinions I value, who did not like this book at all. And now I am questioning my judgment. So the setup of this book is that this is sort of a generationship scenario, but without the actual generations, because instead of like having generations of children as the spaceship is going towards its faraway destination, what people are doing is uploading their memories to their individual quote-unquote book in the ship's quote-unquote library. And then when they reach the end of their lifespan, they are able to be like downloaded into a new body from their book in the library. Our protagonist, Dorothy, is a ship's detective who wakes up in a body that isn't hers and is told by the ship that there's a murder she needs to solve. The premise here to me is really interesting because what really is a murder in a society where you're expected to be able to bring the dead right back? Is it the violent act, or in the event that you could erase someone's book, is that more of a murder than causing the death of a flesh body? It also establishes this sort of semi-cozy situation where the people in this book are living with a certain amount of security in their sort of immortality. There is something to the fantasy of that is kind of genuine wish fulfillment. But also there are a lot of questions about the society that come up that I think other reviewers think are not handled with the depth or care that they deserve. My take on it reading this book is that this is setting up a series, and that it's laying the groundwork for future books to have a lot of interesting thematic material. Maybe I have too much faith when it comes to books that I know are meant to be a first book in a series, that of course, if the author is dropping things here and there, they must have a plan for that. A lot of authors don't have a plan for that, and then I end up disappointed in the sequels. To me, this seemed like a really good starting point for a long-running series, and I do hope that the further books live up to my expectations. So I gave this 4 stars, I liked it, and I am second-guessing myself. Next was the book that I ended up liking least of all of the books on this list, and this was a huge bummer for me because I fully expected to love this book, and this was Automatic Noodle by Annalee Newitz. This coulda, shoulda, woulda been such an easy win for me. I love noodles, and this is just promising me cozy sci-fi noodles. And I know this is the wrong place to start with this review, but I was so disappointed by how little focus there was on the noodles. So this is about a group of robots living in San Francisco in a future where California has had a brutal civil war with the United States and is now independent, but like rebuilding from the brutal Civil War situation. Robots are second-class citizens, but we're told that this is still better than whatever is happening in the dystopian hellscape of the rest of the United States. And these robots have all been like shut off and left behind in this delivery kitchen where they were all working, and they wake up and decide that their best option is to start their own restaurant in this space, and they are going to have a go at it running a noodle restaurant. Now, I know that like what feels cozy to people can be extremely individual and like very, very hard to pin down. It's very, very hard for me to pin down for myself what I feel is cozy. I've been trying to work it out over the years that cozy SFF has been blossoming. One of the most popular strains of it is the like oddball characters start a small business strain of cozy SFF. And I think I'm coming to the conclusion that the small business cozy doesn't hit for me. Like, maybe this could have hit if it had been all about noodle nerdery and not about running the business, which is what it was really about, and like their business getting review bombed on the delivery app. Maybe this could have been saved for me if I'd really loved the characters. Again, what makes characters sort of jump out of the page and grab you is also just, I think, really personal, and these robot characters didn't do that for me. They felt pretty flat, and their storylines really predictable for this sort of formula of cozy small business. We are all oddballs with a traumatized past, but now our co-workers are gonna be our found family and we're all gonna trust each other sort of thing. Maybe there was something interesting going on with the politics world building, but it sort of failed to grab my imagination. I will say the whole like review bombing plotline, which is kind of the main plot, felt like it might be a stand-in for the author's feelings about, like, review bombing on Goodreads, and it felt maybe a little on the nose to me. I could be totally wrong. Maybe it's not about Goodreads at all. I wished it were more about Noodles. Anyway, I gave this 3 stars, and it was the book all the way at the bottom of my ranking. And then my other 3-star read of the batch was What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. This is the 3rd book at this point in the Sworn Soldier series, all of which have been nominated for Hugo Awards. This is at this point a reliable 3-star series for me. Not necessarily in a bad way. This was the last of the novellas I picked up, and honestly, there is something about T. Kingfisher's writing style that was a breath of fresh air for me after all of the others. She's very voicey. I like Alex Easton as a protagonist. The whole format of this series, where book after book the character goes somewhere and experiences something spooky, is not necessarily my cup of tea. This book, however, does have something in it, I'm gonna try not to spoil this, that you think is going to be spooky, or like the characters think it's gonna be a big spooky thing. And it turns out not to be spooky. It is spectacularly weird, but friend-shaped spectacularly weird, as opposed to horrible enemy. And that was the best part of the book, but also sort of wildly outside the established tone of these books in this series up until now, so make of that what you will. These books are mild alternate history, and I don't find the alternate history in them especially inspiring, just as I don't find the horror in them especially inspiring. But I really truly didn't hate this. There were parts of this where I was having a really genuinely good time. I gave it 3 stars, like a sort of tepid positive 3 stars. I've talked about my feelings about this series and the first 2 books, and that's this series, at some length in a recent video, so I won't spend too much time rehashing those feelings here. So ultimately my ranking for these was number 1, The River Has Roots. Number 2, Murder by Memory. Maybe controversial take, maybe I'll regret this. Number 3, Cinder House. Number 4, The Summer War. Number 5, What Stalks the Deep. And number 6, Automatic Noodle. Let me know if you agree with me. If you don't, fight me in the comments. My overall feeling about this novella list was just kind of meh. And I say that having, like, to some extent enjoyed most of the books. I didn't hate any of them. I rather liked several, but none of them really inspired, like, the intellectual or emotional passion that I look for and hope for on the Hugo shortlist. So I thought here at the end of the video would be a good chance to shout out the other 2 books I nominated for this award alongside The River Has Roots, neither of which are Tor.com novellas, because I try really hard to read and nominate some books from other publishers in the novella category every year. So I really liked and I nominated The Iron Below Remembers by Sharang Biswas, which is a Neon Hemlock novella. I am consistently very impressed with the quality of what this small press puts out. This is set in like an alternate contemporary superhero world with like a very alternate history behind it. And it follows a historian who is dating a superhero, and he gets roped into this archaeological find that the superhero organization is handling. This is very voicey writing. I do love a good voicey book. This is super queer. It's a little bit raunchy. It is heavily footnoted, and I personally found it to be very, very funny. I also nominated The Orb of Cairado by Katherine Addison, which is a standalone novella in the world of the Goblin Emperor that was published by Subterranean Press last year. This overall series, which is called The Chronicles of Osreth, is nominated in Best Series, and I would kind of like to do another video about the Best Series category if I have time. But I do think if you're willing to dive headfirst into some very dense world building without a lot of hand-holding, you could start here. You could read this as a standalone. This is, interestingly, also about a scholar and some archaeology. It turns into a bit of a murder mystery partway through. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Anyhow, I will be at Worldcon in Anaheim. If you see me, please do say hello. But for now, I hope you're having a nice day. That is all. Bye for now.